Give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. Well, some of you may be aware that over the next 2 weeks, there are going to be a couple of elections. And it's a strange thing, isn't it, that the one that is further away, the one that we have no control over, is the one that most Queenslanders are talking about rather than our own Queensland election. And with all the political turmoil around that election, Christians, not just in the US, but all over the world, are in an uncomfortable position. A trap that we have been trying to free ourselves from for 2 millennia, but just keep getting dragged back into. One side of politics in America has decided that Christians can be very useful politically. And some Christians have gone along with that, enjoying the favours and freedoms that friendship with powerful people can bring, while other Christians have been outraged that their faith has been used as a political weapon. And now, I'm not mentioning this to criticise anyone. When people are placed under that sort of pressure, it can be really difficult to think clearly and act consistently. But we do need to try to think clearly about how our politics sits with our faith. Do they sit together? Should they sit together? Or should they be kept completely separate? When Jesus said, "Give to the emperor that which is the emperor's and give to God that which is God's," was he declaring an eternal separation of politics from religion? Fulfill your responsibilities in both realms and don't get them confused. Pay your taxes, go to church on Sunday. That will keep God and the emperor happy and all will be well. It's kind of neat, isn't it? The only problem is that it's probably pretty much the opposite of what Jesus was saying. Jesus illustrated his point with a coin. In the Roman world, having the image of an emperor on coins, well, having an emperor at all was relatively new, but having an image of the political leader was a new innovation. Their coins usually had featured the heads of their gods and goddesses. Jews, on the other hand, refused to acknowledge any god but Yahweh, and they were not permitted to draw or sculpt images of God at all. So their coins did not have heads on them at all, and coins that did have a divine or human image on them could not be used in the temple. And that's why there were money changers in the temple courtyards. Roman currency did still circulate in Judea, though, and was used to pay for things like Roman taxes, which is why someone Jesus was talking to happened to have one in his pocket. So Roman coins had gods and goddesses imprinted on them until Julius Caesar. And so Julius Caesar, wanting to make a lasting impression on the Roman world, put his own head on one side of the coin and the goddess Venus on the other side. His face in the hand of every shopper in every marketplace throughout his dominions said very clearly, "You may never see me in person, but never forget who it is who is in charge here. In fact, I'm the flip side of a god." And then Julius Caesar was declared to be a god after he died. And so happened to his adopted son Augustus as well. He was declared a god after his death. So the coin that Jesus held in his hand would have had the head of Augustus's stepson, Tiberius, who could therefore claim to be the son and the grandson of a god. So if you'd suggested to a Roman that perhaps they should keep religion and politics separate, they would not have even understood what you were saying. They would have not even had the language to understand a concept like that. And to a Jew who had no God but God, living in a world in which foreign overlords were declared to be gods after their death, keeping religion and politics separate would have been even more meaningless. So, some Pharisees tried to get Jesus in trouble by saying, is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? At this time, the people of God were under the heel of this ruthless empire. Their allegiance was to God, but the emperor had little respect for their God or for them. As I mentioned last week, Roman taxes had been crippling ordinary Jewish people, and members of their own community had been co-opted into the corrupt system of collecting Roman taxes. Not only that, but according to contemporary historian Josephus, there was a groundswell of Galileans who believed that paying Roman taxes, amounted to blasphemy because it acknowledged the emperor as king, whereas only God should be acknowledged as king. Now, the people who were asking Jesus this question were trying to get him into trouble, and not just into a little bit of a political debate, but real trouble. And no doubt they had made sure that some of these rough northerners were standing nearby when they asked the question, with their rather large muscles and their rather sharp knives, ready to attack Jesus if he happened to say, yes, pay those taxes. But no doubt they were also careful to make sure that there were some soldiers nearby, Roman soldiers, with their big muscles and sharp swords, ready to arrest Jesus for treason if he were to say, no, don't pay the taxes. So their trap was well set. There was no answer Jesus could give without severe and immediate consequences. Or so it seemed. But Jesus was smart. He took a coin and he said, whose head is this? And they said, well, it's the emperor. So give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. These words were open to a range of interpretations, which is one of the things that makes them so clever. But yes, sure, go ahead, pay your taxes. That's not really one of the interpretations that was open. If the crowds thought Jesus was saying that, then there would have been a violent eruption. So there's a spectrum of ways to interpret what Jesus said. At the more radical end, we have a suggestion by gospel scholars such as N.T. Wright, who most people wouldn't consider terribly radical, who suggests that when Jesus said, give to the emperor that which is the emperor's, he may well have been saying, let the emperor have what's coming to him. Give him what he deserves. And let the hearer judge for him or herself what that might be. And many of the hearers would have known exactly what this immoral tyrant deserved. That's the more radical interpretation that Jesus left open in his words. The softer, more subversive possibility is this. The emperor has asserted his ownership over the coins, the currency of the empire, by putting his head on it. Okay then, let him have what's his. Let go of your rights. Let go of what seems necessary for your survival. The emperor wants it, let him have it. This is a call to freedom. It is a call to empty our hands of the things that control us, to live simply, humbly, so that we cannot be controlled by any tyrant. When Jesus said these things, he was within a week of dying at the hands of that emperor's representative. The emperor asserted his right to take Jesus' life, and Jesus said, okay, you can have it. He gave to the emperor what the emperor demanded. And when he did this, he wasn't just asserting his own freedom, he was setting us all free from all sorts of tyranny. But Jesus didn't stop there. The next point was the real punchline. Give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, but give to God that which is God's. The emperor's image was on a coin. Where is God's image? God doesn't need coins. Human beings are God's image. You, me, everyone. If I am to give to God the things that are God's, I will give God my very self, my whole self, everything I am. Not only that, every other human being is also in the image of God, so I will not use other people to serve my own interests. I will not use them to further my own agendas. I will leave them in the gentle hands of God. Understanding this has changed the world many times. Belief that all people are made in God's image fired the movement to abolish slavery, and it still does. A few years ago, I was at a conference where one of the speakers had been on a Bible teaching trip to Uganda. And after one of the talks that she gave in Uganda, a man approached her and said, you said that women are made in God's image, not just men? She said, yeah, that's what I said. That's what Genesis 1 says. And he said, oh. So maybe we shouldn't be cutting our girls. This man was a pastor in his community, but he had never known that women were made in God's image as well as men. He thought it was just men. But he saw the implication. And he spent the next few years of his life working with this woman and a number of other locals to eliminate female genital mutilation from several regions in Uganda. This is one of the most practical doctrines that we can teach. We are all made in God's image, so give to God that which is God's. We don't have time to look in detail at the next conversation that Jesus had, this strange scenario about a woman who is married to 7 brothers in turn. But we can briefly notice a connection between those two passages. The Sadducees came to Jesus with an overt cynicism about the possibility of resurrection. But they also had an underlying assumption that they probably didn't even notice. An assumption that a woman is owned by her husband, and that if the resurrection were real, that ownership would go on for all eternity. Jesus dismissed both the overt cynicism and the underlying assumption. The eternal purposes of God do not make any room for ownership of one person by another. All are the image of God. You belong to God, nobody else. And those people who seem to have power, they only have power over the little stuff. Things like currency. they can never control the important things, like your heart. So when you feel yourself to be threatened by any tyrant, you may or may not choose to pray, God, please give them what they deserve, but that option's open. But you can always say to the tyrant, okay then, you can stamp your image on coins, you can stamp your image on buildings, you can stamp your image on the internet and media outlets, but you can never stamp your image on me. I bear God's image, and you can never compete with that. So in all the uncertainties of the coming week and anxieties of the coming elections, may you know in every fibre of your being that you and every person in Queensland and every person in the United States and every person in the world belongs to God and nobody else. Amen.